Hi, this video is about seeing the moon in expression. It has two intentions. The first intention is to validate my astrological insights using case studies. The second intention is to provide you with an understanding of the way that the moon in the natal chart expresses itself through the personality and through the lifestyle of the individual. So let's begin. We'll start by validating my astrological claim that the sign Pisces is an energy conductor and a sign of electricity. We'll begin by looking at the natal chart of a 18th century and 19th century composer named Franz Schubert. So as we can see here on Astro Theme, Franz Schubert has his moon at 20° Pisces. Scrolling down, we'll see his whole chart, and we'll see that the moon is conjunct its own dispositor, which is Jupiter. That's a great sign for exceptional gifted abilities. Now we'll also see, if we click on the Saturn, or even if we click on the moon, that the moon makes a square to Saturn. This will indicate poverty, because Saturn, as much as being a sign of deep esotericism, is also a sign of hardship and poverty. Let's look at the biography of Franz Schubert. Looking at the section titled Recognition, we see that pianist Andreas Schiff said that Schubert lived a very short life, but it was a very concentrated life. In 31 years, he lived more than other people would live in 100. So this indicates that Schubert had a prolific output. Despite dying young at age 31, he produced a lot of compositions. Now we have an anecdote from his own brother about his capacity and his skill. His brother Ignace recalls, "I was amazed when Franz told me a few months after we began that he had no need of further instruction from me and that he would make his own way in the future. His progress in a short period was so great that I was forced to acknowledge in him a master who had completely distanced and outstripped me." So we see here that his own brother recognizes his capacities and his talents at a very young age. Now we see here a little bit further below that Franz Schubert received instruction from one Michael Holzer, an organist. And it's claimed that Holzer would assure Schubert's father with tears in his eyes that he had never had such a pupil as Schubert, and the lessons may have largely consisted of conversations and expressions of admiration. So it goes without saying that we have a subject here who portrays enhanced capacity, a large creative output, and what we could say an electrical disposition. Now, as to the Saturn nature, it's known that Schubert lived in poverty and he died in poverty. The value of his estate at the time of his death was worth less than a few months' rent. Now let's move on to a second case study that portrays the nature of the Pisces moon. Here we have a man who needs no further introduction, being a founding father of America, as well as what could be called the founding father of electricity. We'll see here that he has a 5-degree Pisces moon, Benjamin Franklin. There's no real purpose in this video for looking further into his chart, but for curiosity's sake, we can see that the moon is in sextile to Venus and the midheaven in Capricorn. Needless to say, we all understand that Benjamin Franklin was a founder of electricity. He invented the thunder rod, or the lightning rod, rather. And he did plenty of experiments with electricity and locomotion at a time when this was in its infancy, before the Industrial Revolution. So again, we can say that we have a prolific figure who displays the characteristic of electricity, of dynamism, and other such traits relating to Pisces and the thunder god, Jupiter. So hopefully that serves for some thought. What we should see here specific to the moon is that the moon expresses itself through the personality and the lifestyle of the person. We don't see Benjamin Franklin say, oh, I'm a Pisces moon, I'll go use electricity. We see someone who is put into a life situation and a series of circumstances that evolve him into adapting the electrical nature of Pisces into his lifestyle. And the same goes for Franz Schubert. He never woke up and said, I'm a Pisces moon, I'll become prolific, and I'll have a huge creative output, a huge reservoir of energy and resource. He simply is designed that way, and it unfolds in his lifestyle and his biography. So next we'll use another 2 case studies looking at another moon sign. So let's move forward. So this is a man that we know all too well. We know that he was a bit of a mad lad. He was famous for having a pet anteater. He's famous for his abstract expressions, which have very little bearing on reality. So we can say that this was a mentally eccentric person. And we see that he has a moon in Aries at the 2nd degree. So we can associate Aries with eccentricity, mental eccentricism, through the esoteric rulership of Aries, which is Mercury, and through the simple nature of Aries, being the first sign of spring, being the awakening of life and the coming forth. We'll see Mercury's rulership as the transfusion of hot and cold, of ice and heat. So alongside that, we have heat, which is associated with anger or Mars or madness. And we have the idea of creative madness in spring. Think of the muses. Now, just for the sake of continuity, we'll look at his chart in depth. And we'll see that he actually has the moon in a square to Neptune and in a square to Uranus, which will only add on the one side to his creative output and his prolificness as per Neptune, similar to Pisces. And respectively, on the other side, we'll have a further push for eccentricism through the Uranus aspect. let's move forward to the next chart. So here we have a man that many aren't familiar with, a Frenchman named Émile Zola. He was a writer and a novelist. He has Moon in Aries at the 17th degree. For the sake of continuity, we'll look again at his chart in depth, and we'll see here that he has a bunch of interesting conjunctions to Pluto, Mars, and Mercury, and the Sun. So this is a very concentrated person in this Aryan energy. And we'll keep in mind that under my scope, Aries represents eccentricism of the mind. And we'll look into his biography. So Émile Zola was a noted eccentric by people. By psychologists, he was referred to as a neuropath, which is somebody with a highly sensitive neurological system. This is a antiquated way of saying that he was an anxious personality. Now, aside from that, we see here that he had an unconventional lifestyle. He lived a double life. He had a wife and he had a mistress. Now, in the case of most people, mistresses and wives don't get along, but in his case, he fathered 2 children with his mistress, and his wife ultimately accepted them, as well as his mistress, into their home. So he essentially had an unusual lifestyle. And that's one aspect of the Aryan eccentricism, to do away with customs for the sake of personal freedom and personal path making. Aries is a path maker to the extent that they don't identify with customs or culture. And you'll see this even in the Aries Sun personalities, like the famous 18th century adventurer Jack Casanova. He was an Italian that defied all the cultural boundaries. He was born into a actor's lifestyle, and at a time when acting was looked at as a beggar profession, and he rose up to the aristocracy, and he associated with princesses and kings and did work for them, so on and so forth. So we have to keep in mind that under my scope of astrology, Aries takes on a more esoteric format, and it relates more to the mind, to the quote-unquote creative madness. And we have 2 examples of that in Dali and in Zola. Now you'll notice that Zola didn't have an aspect of the moon to Uranus, so we can't say that Uranus alone, like in the case of Dali's chart, expresses or adds to eccentricism. It seems rather that eccentricism is an aspect of Aries, or of the creative madness that comes with the transfusion of heat and cold, of hot and cold. So now we'll move on to a third set of case examples. This time we'll use the moon in Taurus. So I've written a lot about Taurus, and I've expressed Taurus a lot lately. I admire it now that I understand its relationship to the mysteries is deeper than I expected. Now, we'll have some intimations of that in nature. For example, the fact that the psychedelic mushroom is connected to the bovine animal, the cow, the bull, the Taurus. Other than that, we can rely on its esoteric rulership, which is Vulcan. And I have here in my notes a little bit that I wrote about that, and I'll read it as a preemption to our case studies, so that you can understand the nuance here in my scope of astrology. Because in the traditional scope of astrology, we limit these signs, Pisces, Aries, to what's been handed down to us. And with Taurus, of course, we relegate it to being a quote-unquote foodie. And it's much more than that. So here I wrote in my notes, Taurus is an amazing sign and energy of occultism and magic. It's the energy of Vulcan, the inventor in the cavern in the earth, the place where night meets the orange glow, and where ideas form out of the essence of spirit, which is non-duality. This is the energy of transformation, the mover of the fixed wheel. This is because spring is the energy of life, growth, fire, water. Indeed, it's the day energy which people see as the cow, which is connected to the mysteries in such a strange way as to be revealed in the mud as psilocybin mushrooms. So you can think on that on your own time about the association of Vulcan, the man in the earth, so to speak, the metallurgist, the reforger, so on, and we can get an idea of Taurus. Now, we'll look at another picture here in a moment. Now, to me, one of the most interesting things about a bull is the weight that its own legs can bear. Its legs don't buckle. It doesn't have legs the size of an elephant's legs. It almost has legs that are the size of human legs. And yet, those legs can uphold the weight of that entire form. So when we look at this platonically or through the Platonic scheme, which is to recognize an object according to its qualities, i.e. what qualifies an object, we can say that the bull form, what qualifies it is the bearing of weight. So now we'll move on to the charts. So here we have a famous 90s musician named Elliott Smith. He has the sun in Leo and he has the moon in Taurus at 27 degrees for the sake of continuity. We see that his moon is in a square to Mercury, opposition to Neptune, opposition to Mars, trine to Pluto, trine to Uranus, trine to Jupiter. So his moon is highly active in the best light and in the worst light. Now, the biography of Elliott Smith can be summed up as that he had a troubled personal life. He suffered under a lot of the hermetic qualities of separation, isolation. He had a looming darkness over him, which is why I referred to the ratio, the leg to body ratio of the bull as an identifier of struggle and weight bearing. In humans, that weight goes to their shoulders. We say that they have a weight on they're carrying a heavy load. And that's how we can describe Elliott Smith. He was a successful musician with a troubled personal life. He began doing drugs, heroin, crack, and yet he trudged on with his public persona, and he died by suicide. So we can say that this person had a dark cloud over them. They have the Negredo effect, the blackening, which is familiar to all earth signs. So that's a great example of the hermetic nature of how Taurus displays in the personality and the biography, so to speak. We'll look at one outlying case study just to prove the esoteric nature and disposition of Taurus with the following chart. So in this chart, we can see that although the moon is in Capricorn, it is in a trine to the sun in 0° Taurus. So that will modify the moon to have Taurus-like qualities. But aside from that, we can see that several planets are in Taurus in this chart. So this will lend to the idea that we have an occultic and a hermetic personality. Now, this personality wasn't specifically known for occultism or magic or esotericism, but in a very unique and nuanced way, esotericism and occultism and mysticism played a part in his identity and his construct, so to speak, because he attempted to utilize those things and implement them into his environment. So we'll scroll up and we'll show you who it is. Surprise, surprise, it's the one and only Adolf Hitler. Now, I don't expect many people to know that he did put a lot of energy in his politics or in his government into the occult. And I'll give proof of that in a moment. So here we have AI's overview, and we'll just read. So, the Nazi Party engaged extensively with occultism, fringe science, and esoteric mythology, using these concepts to shape their racial ideology and political goals. And we can skim through this. Runes and symbolism. Heinrich Himmler established a research society that expanded into exploring fringe sciences, so on and so forth. And you can see there's videos on Nazi occultism, Tullianism, love affair with the occult, which is werewolves and vampires, so on and so forth. So this is no need to go any further. This is just to prove the case or the identity of Taurus as being connected with the mysteries of mind, the mystery of non-duality, the mystery of the occult. So, in conclusion, I hope that you have somewhat of a new breadth or somewhat of an expanded scope as far as what these signs mean, and as far as how the planets, specifically the moon, manifest in the biography, so to speak. So thank you for your time and consideration. Again, this video is designed with the purpose of showing you how to see the moon in the biography of the person, as well as giving you a change of perspective and a validation of my scope of astrology. And hopefully that you see these signs in a different light. Thank you for your time.